Ah, I am live. Looks like we're good. Looks like we show up on Twitter. And I believe we're on Rumble as well. Hello, and welcome to another reading stream. As you may or may not know, we are reading through The King of Elfland's Daughter by Lord Dunsany. A recommendation to me. Not just from friends who play tabletop, but also from Appendix N in tabletop. I've been unofficially going through that list of books and reading them. And this one seemed like a good one to read out loud and in front of people. So we're going to be doing that. If you wish to follow along, as always, we are reading the Ballantine Books edition that has the introduction by Neil Gaiman. I don't know what you feel about the guy, or I have no opinions myself, but at least this edition is verified. I have another edition I bought that was an independent press, an independent printing of it, and there were mistakes everywhere in the book and AI art, and I didn't like that at all. So I had to find something that was a little bit more trustworthy. So, if you're following along, this is the edition we're reading. We're going to be picking up on page 38 in chapter 6, The Rune of the Elf King. So, without any further ado, I suppose we should start. But maybe first, just a reminder, since I've done a few of these. This isn't really meant to be a performance, nor is it really meant to be just something that you passively engage with. If there's a passage that interests you watching it while I'm streaming this, point it out in the chat. If there's parts that interest me, I'm going to stop and dwell on them and focus on them. It is a read along with the sole purpose of enjoying the text out loud and engaging in it in a very localized manner and seeing what comes to mind as you read. More of an active book club, if you will. So as I start reading that, think about that. Think that this is a reading that can be interrupted with anything in regards to the book itself, things you've gathered, or what have you. So we're 3 minutes in. Let's get started. The King of Elfland's Daughter. Let's pop this up for you to see. The King of Elfland's Daughter, Chapter 6, The Rune of the Elf King. On the high balcony of his gleaming tower, the King of Elfland stood. Below him echoed yet 1,000 steps. He had lifted his head to chant the rune that should hold his daughter in Elfland, and in that moment had seen her pass the murky barrier, which on this side, facing toward Elfland, is all lustrous with twilight, and on that side, facing towards the fields we know, is smoky and angry and dull. And now he had dropped his head till his beard lay mingled with his cape of ermine above his cerulean cloak, and stood there silently sorrowful, while time passed swift as ever over the fields we know. And standing there all blue and white against his silver tower, aged by the passing of times of which we know nothing, before he imposed its eternal calm upon Elfland, he thought of his daughter amongst our pitiless years, for he knew, whose wisdom surpassed the confines of Elfland, and touched our rugged fields, knew well the harshness of material things, and all the turmoil of time. Even as he stood there, he knew that the years that assail beauty, and the myriad harshness that vex the spirit, were already about his daughter. And the days that remained to her now seemed scarce more to him, dwelling beyond the fret and ruin of time, than to us might seem a briar rose's hours when plucked, and foolishly hawked in the streets of a city. He knew that there hung over her now the doom of all mortal things. He thought of her perishing soon, as mortal things must, to be buried amongst the rocks of a land that scorned Elfland, and that held its most treasured myths to be of little account. And were he not the king of all that magical land, which held its eternal calm from his own mysterious serenity. He had swept to think of the grave and rocky earth gripping that form that was so fair forever. Or else he thought she would pass to some paradise far from his knowledge, some heaven of which books told and the fields we know, for he had heard even of this. He pictured her on some apple-haunted hill, under blossoms of an everlasting April, through which flickered the pale gold halos of those that had cursed Elfland. He saw, though dimly for all his magical wisdom, the glory that only the blessed clearly see. He saw his daughter on those heavenly hills, stretched out both arms, as he knew well she would, towards the pale blue peaks of her elfin home, while never one of the blessed heeded her yearning. And then, though he was king of all that land, that had its everlasting calm from him, he wept, and all Elfland shivered. It shivered as placid waters shiver here, if something suddenly touches it from our fields. Then the king turned and left his balcony, and went in great haste down his brazen steps. As with all things in the morning, gotta water the reader here. He came clanging to the ivory tower doors that shut the tower below, and through them came to the throne room of which only song may tell. And there he took a parchment out of the coffer, and a plume from some fabulous wing, and dipping the plume into no earthly ink, wrote out a rune on the parchment. Then raising 2 fingers, he made the minor enchantment whereby he summoned his guard, and no guard came. I have said that no time passed at all in Elfland, yet the happening of events is in itself a manifestation of time, and no event can occur unless time pass. Now it is thus with time in Elfland. In the eternal beauty that dreams in that honeyed air, nothing stirs or fades or dies. Nothing seeks its happiness in movement or change or a new thing, but has its ecstasy in the perpetual contemplation of all that beauty that has ever been, and which always glows over those enchanted lawns, as intense as when first created by incantation or song. Yet, if the energies of the wizard's mind arose to meet a new thing, then that power that had laid its calm upon Elfland and held back time, troubled the calm a while, and time for a while shook Elfland, cast anything into a deep pool from a land strange to it, where some great fish dreams, and green weeds dream, and heavy colors dream, and light sleeps. The great fish stirs, the colors shift and change, the green weeds tremble, the light wakes. A myriad things know slow movement and change, and soon the whole pool is still again. It was the same when Alveric passed through the border of twilight, and right through the enchanted wood, and the king was troubled and moved, and all Elfland trembled. When the king saw that no guard came, he looked into the wood, which he knew to be troubled, through the deep mass of the trees that were quivering yet with the coming of Alveric. He looked through the deeps of the wood, and the silver walls of his palace, for he looked by enchantment, and there he saw the 4 knights of his guard lying stricken upon the ground with their thick elvish blood hanging out through slits in their armor. And he thought of the early magic whereby he had made the eldest, with a rune all newly inspired, before he had conquered time. He passed out through the splendor and glow of one of his flashing portals, and over a gleaming lawn, and came to the fallen guard, and saw the trees still troubled. "There has been magic here," said the king of Elfland. And then, though he only had 3 runes that could do such a thing, and though they only could be uttered once, and one was already written upon parchment to bring his daughter home, he uttered the second of his most magical runes over that elder knight that his magic had made long ago, and in the silence that followed the last words of the rune, the rents in the moon-bright armor all clicked shut at once, and the thick dark blood was gone, and the knight rose live to his feet, and the elf king now had only 1 rune left that was mightier than any magic we know. The other 3 knights lay dead, and having no souls, their magic returned again to the mind of their master. He went back then to his palace, while he sent the last of his guards to fetch him a troll. Dark brown of skin, and 2 or 3 feet high, the trolls are a gnomish tribe that inhabit Elfland. And soon there was a scamper in the throne room that may only be told of in song, and a troll lit by the throne on its 2 bare feet, and stood before its king. And the king gave it the parchment with the rune written thereupon, saying, "Scamper thence, and pass over the end of the land, until you come to the fields that none know here, and find Princess Lyrazel, who is gone. to the haunts of men, and give her this rune, and she shall read it, and all shall be well. And the troll scampered thence, and soon the troll was come with long leaps to the frontier of twilight. Then nothing moved in Elfland any more, and motionless on that splendid throne of which only song may speak, sat the old king mourning in silence. I've already said this before, but I am loving the reading of this book. There's so many fantastical things and things constructed in just such a way that are just totally my jam. But I digress. We are now in Chapter 7, The Coming of the Troll. When the troll came to the frontier of twilight, he skipped nimbly through. Yet he emerged cautiously into the fields we know, for he was afraid of dogs. Slipping quietly out of those dense masses of twilight, he came so softly into our fields that no eye had seen him, unless it were gazing already at the spot at which he appeared. There he paused for some instants, looking to the left and right, and seeing no dogs, he left the barrier of twilight. This troll had never before been in the fields we know, yet he knew well to avoid dogs, for that fear of dogs is so deep and universal amongst all that are less than man, that it seems to have passed even beyond our boundaries, and to have been felt in Elfland. In our fields it was now May, and the buttercups stretched away before the troll, a world of yellow mingled with the brown of the budding grasses. When he saw so many buttercups shining there, the wealth of earth astonished him, and soon he was moving through them, yellowing his shins as he went. He had not gone far from Elfland when he met with a hare, who was lying in a comfortable arrangement of grass, in which he had intended to pass the time till he should have things to till he should have things to see to. When the hare saw the troll, he sat there without any movement whatsoever, and without any expression in his eyes, and did nothing at all but think. When the troll saw the hare, he skipped nearer, and lay down before it in the buttercups, and asked it the way to the haunts of men, and the hare went on thinking. "Thing of these fields," repeated the troll, "where are the haunts of men?" The hare got up then, and walked towards the troll, which made the hare look very ridiculous, for he had none of the grace while walking that he has when he runs or gambols, and was much lower in front than behind. He put his nose into the troll's face and twitched foolish whiskers. "Tell me the way," said the troll. When the hare perceived that the troll did not smell of anything like dog, he was content to let the troll question him, but he did not understand the language of Elfland, so he lay still again and thought while the troll talked. And at last the troll wearied of getting no answer, so he leaped up and shouted, "Dogs!" and left the hare and scampered away merrily over the buttercups, taking any direction that led away from Elfland. And though the hare could not quite understand Elvish language, yet there was a vehemence in the tone in which the troll had shouted "dogs," which caused apprehension to enter the thoughts of the hare, so that very soon he forsook his arrangement of grass, and lolloped away through the meadow, with one scornful look after the troll. But he did not get very far, but he did not go very fast, going mostly on 3 legs, with one hind leg ready to let down if there should really be dogs. And soon he passed and sat up and put up his ears, and looked across the buttercups and thought deeply. And before the hare had ceased to ponder the troll's meaning, the troll was far out of sight, and had forgotten what he had said. And soon he saw the gables of a farmhouse rise up beyond a hedge. They seemed to look at him with little windows up under red tiles. "A haunt of man," said the troll, and yet some elvish instinct seemed to tell him that it was not here that Princess Lyrazel had come. Still, he went nearer the farm and began to gaze at its poultry. But just at that moment a dog saw him, one that had never seen a troll before, and it uttered one canine cry of astonished indignation, and keeping all the rest of its breath for the chase, sped after the troll. The troll began at once to rise and dip over the buttercups, as though he had almost borrowed its speed from the swallow, and were riding the lower air. Such speed was new to the dog, and he went in a long curve after the troll, leaning over as he went, his mouth open and silent, the wind rippling all the way from his nose to his tail in one wavy current. The curve was made by the dog's baffled hopes to catch the troll as he slanted across. Soon he was straight behind, and the troll toyed with speed, breathing the flowery air in long fresh draughts above the tops of the buttercups. He thought no more of the dog, but he did not cease in the flight that the dog had caused because of the joy of the speed. And this strange chase continued over those fields, the Troll driven on by joy and the dog by duty. For the sake of novelty, then, the Troll put his feet together as he leaped over the flowers, and, alighting with rigid knees, fell forward on his hands, and so turned over, and straightening his elbows suddenly as he turned, shot himself into the air, still turning over and over. He did this several times, increasing the indignation of the dog, who knew well enough that that was no way to go over the fields we know. But for all his indignation, the dog had seen clear enough that he would never catch that Troll, and presently he returned to the farm, and found his master there, and went up to him, wagging his tail. So hard he wagged it that the farmer was sure that he had done some useful thing, and patted him. And there the matter ended. Excuse me. And it was well enough for the farmer that his dog had chased that Troll from his farm, for it had communicated to his livestock any of the wonder of Elfland. They would have mocked at man, and that farmer would have lost the allegiance of all but his staunch dog. And the Troll went on gaily over the tips of the buttercups. Presently he saw rising up, all white over the flowers, a fox that was facing him with its white chest and chin, and watching the Troll as it went. The Troll went near to him, and took a look, and the fox went on watching him, for the fox watches all things. He had come back lately to those dewy fields from slinking by night along the boundary of twilight that lies between here and Elfland. He even prowls inside the very boundary, walking amongst the twilight, and it is in this mystery of that heavy twilight that lies between here and there, that there clings to him some of that glamour that he brings with him to our fields. Well, Norman's dog, said the Troll, for they know the fox in Elfland, from seeing him often go dimly along their borders, and this is the name they give him. Well, thing over the border, said the fox, when he answered at all, for he knew Troll talk. Are the haunts of man near here? Said the Troll. The fox moved his whiskers by slightly wrinkling his lip. Like all liars, he reflected before he spoke, and sometimes even let wise silences do better than speech. Men live here and men live there, said the fox. I want their haunts, said the Troll. What for? Said the fox. I have a message from the king of Elfland. The fox showed no respect or fear at the mention of that dread name, but slightly moved his head and eyes to conceal the awe that he felt. If it is a message, he said, their haunts are over there, and he pointed with his long thin nose towards Earl. How shall I know when I get there? Said the Troll. By the smell, said the fox. It is a big haunt of men, and the smell is dreadful. Thanks, Norman's dog, said the Troll, and he seldom thanked anyone. I should never go near them, said the fox, but for... And he paused and reflected silently. But for what? Said the Troll. But for their poultry. And he fell into a grave silence. Goodbye, Norman's dog, said the Troll, and turned head over heels, and was off on his way to Earl. Passing over the buttercups all through the dewy morning, the Troll was far on his way by the afternoon, and saw before evening the smoke in the towers of Earl. It was all sunk in a hollow, and gables and chimneys and towers peered over the lip of the valley, and smoke hung over them on the dreamy air. The haunts of men, said the Troll. Then he sat down amongst the grasses and looked at it. Presently he went nearer and looked at it again. He did not like the look of the smoke and that crowd of gables. Certainly it smelt dreadfully. There had been some legend in Elfland of the wisdom of man, and whatever respect that legend had gained for us in light of mind of the Troll now, all blew lightly away as he looked at the crowded houses. And he looked at them, and as he looked at them, there passed a child of 4, a small girl on a footpath over the fields, going home in the evening to Earl. They looked at each other with round eyes. Hello, said the child. Hello, child of man, said the Troll. He was not speaking Troll talk now, but the language of Elfland, that grander tongue that he had to speak when he was before the king, for he knew the language of Elfland, although it was never used in the homes of the Trolls, who preferred Troll talk. This language was spoken in those days also by men, for there were fewer languages then, and the elves and the people of Earl both used the same. "What are you?" cried the child. "A troll of Elfland," answered the troll. "So I thought." Where are you going, child of men?" the troll asked. "To the houses," the child replied. "We don't want to go there," said the troll. No," said the child. "Come to Elfland," the troll said. And the child thought for a while. Other children had gone, and the elves always sent a changeling in their place, so that nobody quite missed them, and nobody really knew. Ugh. She thought a while of the wonder of the wilds of Elfland, and then of her own house. No, said the child. "Why not?" said the troll. "Mother made a jam roll this morning," said the child, and she walked on gravely home. Had it not been for that chance jam roll, she'd have gone to Elfland. "Jam!" said the troll contemptuously, and thought of the tarns of Elfland, the great lily leaves lying flat upon their solemn waters, the huge blue lilies towering into the elf light above the green deep tarns. For jam, this child had forsaken them. And then he thought of his duty again, the roll of parchment and the elf king's rune for his daughter. He'd carried the parchment in his left hand when he ran, and his mouth when he somersaulted over the buttercups. Was the princess here, he thought, or were there other haunts of men? As evening drew in, he crept nearer and nearer to the homes, to hear without being seen. Chapter 8. I gotta stop a second, because the somersaulting of a troll across the fields being chased by a dog is a really funny bit of imagery. Yeah. And the way the troll is described, it does feel kind of mixed between the troll we know modern like and goblin. I'm curious of the distinction there. Chapter 8. The Arrival of the Rune. On a sunny May morning in Earl, the witch Zirundarel sat in the castle nursery by the fire, cooking a meal for the baby. The boy was now 3 years old, and still Lyrazel had not named him, for she feared lest some jealous spirit of earth or air should hear the name, and if so, she would not say what she feared then. And Alveric had said he must be named, and the boy could bowl for a hoop, for the witch had gone one misty night to her hill, and had brought him a moon halo, which he had got by enchantment at moonrise, and had hammered it into a hoop, and had made him a little rod of thunderbolt iron, with which to beat it along. Yeah, that's kind of awesome. This witch can make great swords with thunderbolts and hoops with moonrise, moon halos. What a bit of imagery. And now the boy was waiting for his breakfast, and there was a spell across the threshold to keep the nursery snug, which Zerundirel had put there with a wave of her ebon stick, and it kept out rats and mice and dogs, nor could bats sail across it, and the watchful nursery cat it kept at home. No lock that blacksmiths made was any stronger. Suddenly over the threshold and over the spell the troll jumped, somersaulting through the air, and came down sitting. I love this. Suddenly over the threshold and over the spell the troll just jumped, somersaulting through the air, and came down sitting. The crude wood nursery clock hanging over the fire stopped its loud tick as he came, for he bore with him a little charm against time, with strange grass around one of his fingers, that he might not be withered away in the fields we know. For well if the elf king knew the flight of our hours, 4 years had swept over these fields of ours while he had boomed down his brazen steps, and sent for his troll, and given him that spell to bind round one of his fingers. "What's this?" said Zerundarel. That troll knew well when to be impudent, but looking in the witch's eyes, saw something to be afraid of, and well he might, for those eyes had looked in the elf king's own. Therefore he played, as we say in these fields, his best card, and answered, "A message from the king of Elfland." "Is that so?" said the old witch. Yes, she added more lowly to herself, "that would be from my lady. Yes, that would come." The troll sat on the floor, fingering the roll of parchment inside which was written the rune of the king of Elfland. Then over the end of his bed, as he waited for breakfast, the baby saw the troll, and asked him who he was, and where he came from, and what he was able to do. When the baby asked him what he was able to do, the troll jumped up and skipped about the room like a moth on a lamp-lit ceiling. From floor to shelves and back and up again he went with leaps like flying. The baby clapped his hands. The cat was furious. The witch raised her ebon stick and made a charm against leaping, but it could not hold the troll. He leaped and bounced, while the cat hissed all the curses that the feline language knows, and Zerundarel was wroth not only because her magic was thwarted, but because, with mere human alarm, she feared for her cups and saucers, and the baby shouted all the while for more. And all at once the troll remembered his errand, and the dread parchment he bore. "Where is the Princess Lyrazel?" he said to the witch. And the witch pointed the way to the princess's tower, for she knew that there was no means nor power she had by which to hinder a rune from the king of Elfland. And as the troll turned to go, Lyrazel entered the room. He bowed low before this great lady of Elfland, and with all his impudence in a moment lost, kneeling on one knee before the blaze of her beauty, and presented the elf king's rune. The boy was shouting to his mother to demand more leaps from the troll as she took the scroll in her hand. The cat, with her back to a box, was watching alertly. Zerundarel was all silent. And then the troll thought of the weed-green tarns of Elfland, and the woods that the trolls knew. He thought of the wonder of the unwithering flower that time has never touched, the deep, deep color, and the perpetual calm. His errand was over, and he was weary of earth. For a moment nothing moved there but the baby, shouting for new troll antics, and waving his arms. Lyrazel stood with the elfin scroll in her hand. The troll knelt before her. The witch never stirred. The cat stood watching fiercely. Even the clock was still. Then the princess moved, and the troll rose to his feet. The witch sighed, and the cat gave up her watchfulness as the troll scampered away. And though the baby shouted for the troll to return, it never heeded, but twisted down the long spiral stairs, and slipping out through a door, was off towards Elfland. As the troll passed over the threshold, the wooden clock ticked again. Lyrazel looked at the scroll, and looked at her boy, and did not unroll the parchment, but turned and carried it away, and came to her chamber, and locked the scroll in a casket, and left it there unread. For her fears told her well the most potent rune of her father, that she had dreaded so much as she fled from his silver tower, and heard his feet go booming up the brass, had crossed the frontier of twilight written upon the scroll, and would meet her eyes the moment she unrolled it, and waft her thence. When the rune was safe in the casket, she went to Alveric to tell him of the peril that had come near her, but Alveric was troubled because she would not name the baby, and asked her at once about this. And so she suggested a name at last to him, and it was one that no one in the fields could pronounce, an elvish name full of wonder, and made of syllables like birds' cries at night. Alveric would have none of it. And her whim in this came, as all the whims she had, from no customary thing of these fields of ours, but sheer over the border from Elfland, sheer over the border with all wild fancies that rarely visit our fields. And Alveric was vexed with these whims, for there had been none like them or of old in the castle of Earl. None could interpret them to him, and none advise him. He looked for her to be guided by old customs. She looked only for some wild fancy to come from the southeast. He reasoned with her, with the human reason that folk set much store by here, but she did not want reason. And so when they parted, she had not after all told anything of the peril that had sought her from Elfland, which she had come to Alveric to tell. I need some water. Naming troubles, huh? She went instead to her tower, and looked at the casket, shining there in the low late light, and turned from it, and often looked again, while the light went under the fields, and the gloaming came, and all glimmered away. She sat then by the casement open towards eastern hills, above whose darkening curve she watched the stars. She watched so long that she saw them change their places. For more than all things else that she had seen since she came to these fields of ours, she had wondered about the stars. She loved their gentle beauty, and yet she was sad as she looked wistfully to them, for Alveric had said that she must not worship them. How, if she might not worship them, could she give them their due? Could she thank them for their beauty? Could she praise their joyful calm? And then she thought of her baby. Then she saw Orion. Then she defied all jealous spirits of air, and looking toward Orion, whom she must never worship, she offered her baby's days to that belted hunter, naming her baby after those splendid stars. And when Elvric came to the tower, she told him of her wish, and he was willing the boy should be named Orion, for all that in that valley set much store by hunting, and the hope came back to Elvric, which he would not put away, that being reasonable at last in this, she would now be reasonable in all other things, and be guided by custom, and do what others did, and forsake wild whims and fancies that came over the border from Elfland. And he asked her to worship the holy things of the freer, for never had she given any of these things their due, and knew not which was holier, his candlestick or his bell, and never would learn for aught that Elvric told her. And now she answered him pleasantly, and her husband thought all was well, but her thoughts were far with Orion. Nor did they ever tarry with grave things long, nor could tarry longer amongst them than butterflies do in the shade. All that night the casket was locked on the rune of the king. All that night the casket was locked on the rune of the king of Elfland. And the next morning Lyrazel gave little thought to the rune, for they went with the boy to the holy place of the freer. And Zerundarel came with them, but waited without. And the folk of Earl came too, as many could leave the affairs of man with the fields. And all there were of those that had made the parliament, when they went to Alvric's sire in the long red room. And all of these were glad when they saw the boy, and marked his strength and growth. And muttering low together as they stood in the holy place, they foretold how all should be as they had planned. And the freer came forth, and, standing amongst his holy things, he gave to the boy before him the name of Orion, though he sooner had given some name of those that he knew to be blessed. And he rejoiced to see the boy, and to name him there. For by the family that dwelt in the castle of Earl, all these folk marked the generations, and watched the ages pass, as sometimes we watch the seasons go over some old known tree. And he bowed himself before Alvric, and was full courteous to Lyrazel. Yet his courtesy to the princess came not from his heart, for in his heart he held her in no more reverence than he held a mermaid that had forsaken the sea. And the boy came even so by the name of Orion. And all the folk rejoiced as he came out with his parents, and rejoined Zerundarel on the edge of the holy garden. And Alvric, Lyrazel, Zerundarel, and Orion all walked back to the castle. And all that day Lyrazel did nothing that caused anybody to wonder, but let herself be governed by custom and the ways of the fields we know. Only when the stars came out and Orion shone, she knew that their splendor had not received its due, and her gratitude to Orion yearned to be said. She was grateful for his bright beauty that cheered our fields, and grateful for his protection, of which she felt sure for her boy, against jealous spirits of air. And all her unsaid thanks so burned in her heart that all of a sudden she rose and left her tower, and went out to the open starlight, and lifted her face to the stars and the place of Orion, and stood all dumb though her thanks were trembling upon her lips. For Alvric had told her one must not pray to the stars. With face upturned to all that wandering host, she stood long silent, obedient to Alvric. Then she lowered her eyes, and there was a small pool glimmering in the night, in which all the faces of the stars were shining. To pray to the stars, she said to herself in the night, is surely wrong. These images in the water are not the stars. I will pray to their images, and the stars will know. And on her knees amongst the iris leaves, she prayed at the edge of the pool, and gave thanks to the images of the stars for the joy she had had of the night, when the constellations shone in their myriad majesty, and moved like an army dressed in silver mail, marching from unknown victory to conquer in distant wars. She blessed and thanked and praised those bright reflections shimmering down in the pool, and bade them tell her thanks and her praise to Orion, to whom she might not pray. It was thus that Alvric found her, kneeling, bent down on the bank, and reproached her bitterly. She was worshipping the stars, he said, which were there for no such purpose, and she said she was only supplicating their images. We may understand his feelings easily, the strangeness of her unexpected acts, her contrariness to all established things, her scorn for custom, her wayward ignorance, jarred on some treasured tradition every day. The more romantic she had been far away over the frontier, as told of by legend and song, the more difficult it was for her to fill any place once held by the ladies of the castle, who were versed in all the lore of the fields we know. And Alvric looked for her to fulfill duties and follow customs which were all as new to her as the twinkling stars. But Lyrazel felt only that the stars had not their due, and that custom or reason or whatever men set store by should demand that thanks be given them for their beauty, and she had not thanked them even, but had supplicated only their images in the pool. That night she thought of Elfland, where all things were matched with her beauty, where nothing changed, and there were no strange customs, and no strange magnificences like the stars of ours, to whom none gave their due. She thought of the elfin lawns, and the towering banks of the flowers, and the palace that may not be told of, but only in song. Still locked in the dark of the casket, the rune bided its time. 1 second, I gotta adjust the chair here. There we go. Let's, something's brewing here. I'm not liking where this is going, but we shall see. Chapter 9. Lyrazel blows away. And the days went by, the summer passed over Earl. The sun that had traveled northward fared south again. It was near to the time when the swallows left those eaves, and Lyrazel had not learnt anything. She had not prayed to the stars again, or supplicated their images, but she had learned no human customs, and could not see why her love and gratitude must remain unexpressed to the stars. And Alveric did not know that the time must come when some simple trivial thing would divide them utterly. And then one day, hoping still, he took her with him to the house of the Freer to teach her how to worship his holy things. And gladly the good man brought his candle and bell, and the eagle of brass that held up his book when he read, and a little symbolic bowl that had scented water, and the silver snuffers that put his candle out. And he told her clearly and simply, as he had told her before, the origin, meaning, and mystery of all these things, and why the bowl was of brass and the snuffer of silver, and what the symbols were that were carved on the bowl. With fitting courtesy, he told her these things, even with kindness, and yet there was something in his voice as he told, a little distant from her, and she knew that he spoke as one that walked safe on shore, calling far to a mermaid amid dangerous seas. As they came back to the castle, the swallows were grouped to go, sitting in the lines along the battlements, and Lyrazel had promised to worship the holy things of the Freer, like the simple worship the holy things of the Freer, like the simple bell-fearing folk of the Valley of Earl. And a late hope was shining in Alveric's mind that even yet all was well. And for many days she remembered all that the Freer had told her. And one day, walking late from the nursery, past tall windows to her tower, and looking out on the evening, remembering that she must not worship the stars, she called to mind the holy things of the Freer, and tried to remember all she was told of them. It seemed so hard to worship them, just as she should. She knew that before many hours the swallows would all be gone, and often when they left, her mood would change, and she feared that she might forget, and never remember more, how she ought to worship the holy things of the Freer. So she went out into the night again, over the grasses, to where a thin brook ran, and drew some great flat pebbles that she knew where to find, turning her face away from the images of the stars. By day the stones shone beautifully in the water, all ruddy and mauve. Now they were all dark. She drew them out and laid them in the meadow. She loved these smooth, flat stones, for somehow they made her remember the rocks of Elfland. She laid them all in a row, this for the candlestick, this for the bell, that for the holy bowl. If I can worship these lovely stones as things ought to be worshipped, she said, I can worship the things of the Freer. Then she kneeled down before the big flat stones and prayed to them as though they were Christum things. And Alveric, seeking her in the wide night, wondering what wild fancy had carried her whither, heard her voice in the meadow, crooning such prayers as are offered to holy things. When he saw the 4 flat stones to which she prayed, bowed down before them in the grass, he said that no worse than this were the darkest days of the heathen. And she said, I am learning to worship the holy things of the Freer. It is the art of the heathen, he said. Now of all things that men feared in the Valley of Earl, they feared most the arts of the heathen, of whom they knew nothing but that their ways were dark. And he spoke with the anger which men always used when they spoke there of the heathen. And his anger went to her heart, for she was but learning to worship his holy things to please him, and yet he had spoken like this. And Alvric would not speak the words that should have been said, to turn aside anger and soothe her, for no man, he foolishly thought, should compromise in matters touching on heathenness. So Lyrazel went alone all sadly back to her tower, and Alvric stayed to cast the 4 flat stones afar. Golly, okay. And the swallows left, and unhappy days went by, and one day Alvric bade her worship the holy things of the Freer, and she had quite forgotten how. And he spoke again of the arts of the heatheness. The day was shining, and the poplars golden, and all the aspens red. Then Lyrazel went to her tower, and opened the casket that shone in the morning with the clear autumnal light, and took in her hand the rune of the king of Elfland, and carried it with her across the high vaulted hall, and came to another tower, and climbed its steps to the nursery. And there all day she stayed and played with her child, with the scroll still tight in her hand, and merrily though she played at whiles, yet there were strange calms in her eyes, which Zerundarel watched while she wondered. And when the sun was low, she had put the child to bed, she sat beside him all solemn, and she told him childish tales. And Zerundarel the wise witch watched, and for all her wisdom only guessed how it would be, and knew not how to make it otherwise. And before sunset, Lyrazel kissed the boy, and unrolled the Elf King's scroll. It was but a petulance that had made her take it from the coffer in which it lay, and the petulance might have passed, and she might not have unrolled the scroll, only that it was there in her hand. Partly petulant, partly wonder, partly whims too idle to name, she drew her eyes to the Elf King's words in their coal-black, curious characters, and whatever magic there was in the rune of which I cannot tell, and dreadful magic there was, the rune was written with love that was stronger than magic, till those mystical characters glowed with the love that the Elf King had for his daughter, and there were blended in that mighty rune 2 powers, magic and love. The greatest power there is beyond the boundary of twilight, with the greatest power there is in the fields we know. And if Alvric's love could have held her, he should have trusted alone to that love, for the Elf King's rune was mightier than the holy things of the Freer. No sooner had Lyrazel read the rune on the scroll than the fancies from Elfland began to pour over the border. Some came that would make a clerk in the city today leave his desk at once to dance on the seashore, and some would have driven all the men in a bank to leave doors and coffers open, and wander away till they came to green open land, and the heathery hills. And some would have made a poet of man, all of a sudden as he sat in his business. There were mighty fancies that the Elf King summoned by the force of his magical rune, and Lyrazel sat there with the rune in her hand, helpless amongst this mass of tumultuous fancies from Elfland. And as the fancies raged and sang and called more and more over the border, all crowding on one poor mind, her body grew lighter and lighter. Her feet half rested, half floated upon the floor. Earth scarcely held her down, so fast was she becoming a thing of dreams. No love of hers for earth, or of the children of earth for her, had any longer power to hold her there. And now came memories of her ageless childhood beside the tarns of Elfland, by the deep forest's border, by those delirious lawns, or in the palace that may not be told of except only in song. She saw those things as clearly as we see small shells in water, looking through clear ice down to the floor of some sleeping lake, a little dimmed in that other region, across the barrier of ice. So too her memory is shown, a little dimly, from across the frontier of Elfland. Little queer sounds of elfin creatures came to her, scents swam from those miraculous flowers that glowed by the lawns she knew. Faint sounds of enchanted songs blew over the border and reached her seated there. Voices and melodies and memories came floating through the twilight. All Elfland was calling. Then, measured and resonant and strangely near, she heard her father's voice. She rose at once, and now earth had lost on her the grip that it has. She rose at once, and now earth had lost on her the grip that it only has on material things, and a thing of dreams, and fancy, and fable, and fantasy, she drifted from the room, and Zerundarel had no power to hold her with any spell, nor had she herself the power ever to turn, even to look at her boy, as she drifted away. And at that moment a wind came out of the northwest, and entered the woods, and bared the golden branches, and danced on over the downs, and led a company of scarlet and golden leaves, that had dreaded this day, but danced now it had come, and away with a ride of dancing and glory and color. High in the light of the sun that had set from the light of the fields went the wind and leaves together. With them went Lyrazel. Oh man, Alvric, come on. Gotta gotta water up. So this is interesting. Kind of an interesting way to approach elves, and the like. Just they're not of time and they're not caught by material fancy. So I like it. I'm getting a sense of how you might play a character in a TTRPG as an elf. Just distant, aloof. There are customs, but you just can't keep them in your mind because you don't. That is not a care of yours. You try, but nothing. But I mean, now Lyrazel is gone with the wind, and boy, I'm not happy about that. Let's get another chapter in and see where we are. Chapter 10, The Ebbing of Elfland. Next morning, Alvric came up the tower to the witch Zerundarel, weary and frantic from searching all night long in strange places for Lyrazel. All night he had tried to guess what fancy had beckoned her out, and whither it might have led her. He had searched by the stream by which he had prayed to the stones, and the pool where she prayed to the stars. He had called her name up every tower, and had called it wide in the dark, and had had no answer but echo. And so he had come at last to the witch Zerundarel. "Whither?" he said, saying no more than that the boy might not know his fears. Yet Orion knew. And Zerundarel all mournfully shook her head. "The way of the leaves," she said, "the way of all beauty." But Alvric did not stay to hear her say more than her first 5 words, for he went with the restlessness with which he had come, straight from the room and hastily down the stair, and out at once into the windy morning, to see which way those glorious leaves were gone. And a few leaves that had clung to the cold branches longer, when the gay company of their comrades had gone, were now too on the air, going lonely and last. And Alvric saw they were going southeast towards Elfland. Hurriedly, then he donned his magical sword and his wide scabbard of leather, and with scanty provisions hastened over the fields after the last of the leaves, whose autumnal glory led him, as many a cause in its later days, all splendid and fallen, leads them all manner of men. And so he came to the upland fields, with their grass all grey with dew, and the air was all sparkling with sunlight, and gay with the last of the leaves. But a melancholy seemed to dwell, with the sound of the lowing of cattle. In the calm of bright morning, with the northwest wind roaming through it, Alvric came by no calm, and never gave up the haste of one who has lost something suddenly. He had the swift movements of such, and the frantic air. He watched all day over the clear wide horizon southeast, where the leaves were leading, and at evening he looked to see the elfin mountains, severe and changeless, unlit by any light we know, the color of pale forget-me-nots. He held on restlessly to see their summits, but never they came to view. And then he saw the house of the old leather worker, who had made the scabbard for his sword, and the sight of it brought back to him the years that were gone since the evening when he first had seen it, although he never knew how many they were, and could not know, for no one has ever devised any exact calculation whereby to estimate the action of time in Elfland. Then he looked once more for the pale blue elfin mountains, remembering well where they lay in their long grave row past a point of one of the leather worker's gables, but he saw never a line of them. Then he entered the house, and the old man was still there. The leather worker was wonderfully aged. Even the table on which he had worked was much older. He greeted Alvric, remembering who he was, and Alvric inquired for the old man's wife. "Oh, she died long ago," he said. And again Alvric felt the baffling flight of those years, which added a fear to Elfland whither he went. Yet he neither thought to turn back, nor reined for a moment his impatient haste. He said a few formal things of the old man's loss that had happened so long ago. Then, "Where are the elfin mountains?" he asked, "the pale blue peaks?" A look came slowly over the old man's face, as though he had never seen them, as though Alvric, being learned, spoke of something that the old leather worker could not know. No, he did not know, he said, and Alvric found that today, as all those years ago, this old man still refused to speak of Elfland. Well, the boundary was only a few yards away. He would cross it and ask the way of the elfin creatures, if he could not see the mountains, to guide him then. The old man offered him some food, and he had not eaten all day, but Alvric in his haste only asked him once more of Elfland, and the old man humbly said that of such things he knew nothing. Then Alveric strode away and came to the fields he knew, which he remembered to be divided by the nebulous border of twilight. And indeed, he had no sooner come to the field than he saw all the toadstools leaning over one way, and that the way he was going. For just as thorn trees all lean away from the sea, so toadstools and every plant that has any touch of mystery, such as foxgloves, mulleins, and certain kinds of orchids, when growing anywhere near it, all lean towards Elfland. By this one may know before one has heard a murmur of waves, or before one has guessed an influence of magical things, that one comes, as the case may be, to the sea or to the border of Elfland. And in the air above him Alveric saw golden birds, and guessed that there had been a storm in Elfland blowing them over the border from the southeast, though a northwest wind blew over the fields we know. And he went on, but the boundary was not there. And he crossed the field as any field we know, and still he had not come to the fells of Elfland. Then Alveric pressed on with new impatience, with the northwest wind behind him, and the earth began to grow bare and shingly and dull, without flowers, without shade, without color, with none of those things that there are in remembered lands, by which we build pictures of them, when we are there no more. It was all disenchanted now. Alveric saw a golden bird high up, rushing away to the southeast, and he followed his flight, hoping soon to see the mountains of Elfland, which he supposed to be merely concealed by some magical mist. But still the autumnal sky was bright and clear, and all the horizon plain, and still there came never a gleam of the elfin mountains. And not from this did he learn that Elfland had ebbed. But when he saw on that desolate shingly plain, untorn by the northwest wind, but blooming fair in the autumn, a May-tree that he remembered a long while since, all white with blossoms that once rejoiced a spring day far in his childhood, then he knew that Elfland had been there and must have receded, although he knew not how far. For it is true, and Alveric knew, that just as the glamour that brightens much of our lives, especially in early years, comes from the rumors that reach us from Elfland by various messengers, on whom be blessings and peace, so there returns from our fields to Elfland again, to become a part of its mystery, all manner of little memories that we have lost, and little devoted toys that were treasured once. And this is part of the law of ebb and flow that science may trace in all things. Thus light grew in the forest of coal, and the coal gives back light. Thus rivers fill the sea, and the sea sends back to the rivers. Thus all things give that receive, even death. Next Alveric saw lying there on the flat dry ground a toy that he yet remembered, which years and years ago, how could he say how many, had been a childish joy to him, crudely carved out of wood, and one unlucky day it had been broken, and one unhappy day it had been thrown away. And now he saw it lying there, not merely new and unbroken, but with a wonder about it, a splendor and a romance. The radiant transfigured thing was that his fancy had known. It lay there forsaken of Elfland, as wonderful things of the sea lie sometimes desolate, on wastes of sand, when the sea is far blue bulk with a border of foam. Dreary with lost romance was the plain from which Elfland had gone, though here and there Alveric saw again and again those little forsaken things that had been lost from his childhood, dropping through time to the ageless and hourless region of Elfland to be part of its glory, and now left forlorn by this immense withdrawal. Old tunes, old songs, old voices hummed there too, growing fainter and fainter, as though they could not live long in the fields we know. And when the sun set, a mauve rose glow in the east, that Alveric fancied a little too gorgeous for earth, led him onward still, for he deemed it to be the reflection cast on the sky by the glow of the splendor of Elfland. So he went on, hoping to find it, horizon after horizon, and night came on with all earth's comrade stars, and only then Alveric put aside at last that frantic restlessness that had driven him since the morning, and wrapping himself in a loose cloak that he wore, ate such food as he had in a satchel, and slept a troubled sleep, alone with other forsaken things. At the earliest moment of dawn his impatience awoke him, although one of October's mists hid all the glimpses of light. He ate the last of his food, and then pushed on through the grayness. No sound from the things of our fields came to him now, for men never went that way when Elfland was there, and none but Alveric went now to that desolate plain. He had travelled beyond the sound of cock-crow from the comfortable houses of men, and was now marching through a curious silence, broken only now and then by the small dim cries of the lost songs that had been left by the ebb of Elfland, and were fainter now than they had been the day before. And when dawn shone, Alveric saw again so great a splendor in the sky, glowing all green, low down in the southeast, that he thought once more he saw a reflection from Elfland, and pressed on, hoping to find it over the next horizon. And he passed the next horizon, and still that shingly plain, and never a peak of the pale blue elfin mountains. Whether Elfland always lay over the next horizon, brightening the clouds with its glow, and moved away just as he came, or whether it had gone days or years before, he did not know, but still kept on, and he came at last to a dry and grassless ridge, on which his eyes and his hopes had been set for long, and from it he looked far over the desolate flatness that stretched to the rim of the sky, and he saw never a sign of Elfland, never a slope of the mountains. Even the little treasures of memory that had been left behind by the ebb were withering into things of our every day. Then Alveric drew his magical sword from its sheath. But though the sword had power against enchantment, it had not been given the power to bring again an enchantment that was gone. And the desolate land remained the same for all that he waved his sword, stony, deserted, unromantic, and wide. And for a little while he went on. But in that flat land the horizon moved imperceptibly with him, and never a peak appeared of the elfin mountains. And on that dreary plain he soon discovered, as sooner or later many a man must, that he had lost Elfland. Oh, man. What a tragedy. Like, I mean, it is of Alveric's making, being so forceful, and of his ways of the freer and not really understanding Lyrazel, but that's sad. I do believe we can get one more chapter in, and then we'll call it a day. Chapter 11, The Deep of the Woods. In those days, Zerundarel would amuse the boy by charms and by little wonders, and he was content for a while. And then he began to guess for himself, all in silence, where his mother was. He listened to all things said, and thought long about them, and days passed thus, and he only knew she had gone, and still he said never a word of the thing with which his thoughts were busy. And then he came to know from things said or unsaid, or from looks, or glances, or wagging of heads, that there was a wonder about his mother's going. But what the wonder was he could not find, for all the marvels that crossed his mind when he guessed. And at last one day he asked Zerundarel, and stored though her old mind was with ages and ages of wisdom, and though she had feared this question, yet she did not know it had dwelt in his mind for days, and could find no better answer out of her own wisdom than that his mother had gone to the woods. When the boy heard this, he determined to go to the woods to find her. Now in his walks abroad with Zerundarel through the little hamlet of Earl, Orion would see the villagers walking by, the smith at his open forge, and folk in their doorways, and men that came into the market from distant fields, and he knew them all. And most of all he knew Threll with his quiet feet, and Oath with his lithe limbs, for both these would tell him tales when they met of the uplands and the deep woods over the hills. and Orion, on little journeys with his nurse, loved to hear tales of far places. There was an ancient myrtle tree by a well, where Zerundarel would sit in the summer evenings while Orion played on the grass, and Oth would cross the grass, and Oth would cross the grass with his curious bow, going out in the evening, and sometimes Threll would come, and every time that one of them came, Orion would stop him and ask him for a tale of the woods, and if it were Oth, he would bow to Zerundarel with a look of awe as he bowed, and would tell some tale of what the deer did, and Orion would ask him why. Then a look would come over Oth's face as though he were carefully remembering things that had happened very long ago, and after some moments of silence he would give the ancient cause of whatever the deer did, which explained how they came by the custom. If it were Threll that came across the grass, he would appear not to see Zerundarel, but would tell his tale of the woods more hastily in a low voice and pass on, leaving the evening, as Orion felt, full of mystery behind him. He would tell tales of all manner of creatures, and the tales were so strange that he told them only to young Orion, because, as he explained, there were many folk that were unable to believe the truth, and he did not wish his tales to come to the ears of such. Once Orion had gone to his house, a dark hut full of skins. All kinds of skins hung on the wall, foxes, badgers, and martens, and there were smaller ones in heap. in heaps in the corners. To Orion, Threll's dark hut was more full of wonder than any other house had ever been. He had ever seen. But now it was autumn, and the boy and his nurse saw Oth and Threll more seldom, for in the misty evenings, with the threat of the frost in the air, they sat no longer by the myrtle tree. Yet Orion watched on their short walks, and one day he saw Threll going away from the village, with his face to the uplands, and he called to Threll, and Threll stood still with a certain air of confusion, for he deemed himself of too little account to be clearly seen and noticed by the nurse at the castle, be she witch or woman. And Orion ran up to him and said, "Show me the woods." And Zorundorel perceived that the time had come when his thoughts were roaming beyond the lip of the valley, and knew that no spell of hers would hold him long from following after them. And Threll said, "No, my master," and looked uneasily at Zorundorel, who came after the boy and led him away from Threll, and Threll went on alone to his work in the deep of the woods. And it was not otherwise than the witch had foreseen, for first Orion wept, then he dreamed of the woods, and next day he slipped away alone to the house of Oth, and asked him to take him with him when he went to hunt the deer. And Oth, standing on a wide deer skin in front of the blazing logs, spoke much of the woods, but did not take him then. Instead he brought Orion back to the castle, and Zorundorel regretted too late that she had idly said his mother was gone to the woods, for those words of hers had called up too soon that spirit of roving which was bound to come to him, and she saw that her spells could bring no content, content no more. So in the end she let him go to the woods, but not until by lifting up a wand and saying the incantation she had called the glamour of the woods down to the nursery hearth, and had made it haunt the shadows that went from the fire and creep with them all about the room, till the nursery was all as mysterious as the forest. When this spell could not soothe him and keep his longing at home, she let him go to the woods. He stole away once more to the house of Oth, over crisp grass one morning, and the old witch knew he had gone, but did not call him back, for she had no spell to curb the love of roving in man, whether it came early or late, and she would not hold back his limbs when his heart was gone to the woods, for it is ever the way of witches with any two things to care for the more mysterious of the two. So the boy came alone to the house of Oth, through his garden where the dead flowers hung on brown stalks, and the petals turned to slime if he fingered them. For November was come, and the frosts were abroad all night. At this time Orion just met with a wood, and this time Orion just met with a mood in Oth, which in less than an hour would have gone, that was favorable to the boy's longing. Oth was taking down his bow from the wall as Orion went in, and Oth's heart was gone to the woods, and when the boy came yearning to go to the woods too, the hunter in that mood could not refuse him. So Oth took Orion on his shoulder, and went up out of the valley. Folk saw them go thus, Oth with his bow, and his soft noiseless sandals, and his brown garments of leather, Orion on his shoulder, wrapped in the skins of a fawn which Oth had thrown around him. And as the village fell behind them, Orion rejoiced to see the houses further and further away, for he had never been so far from them before. And when the uplands opened their distances to his eyes, he felt that he was now upon no mere walk, but a journey. And then he saw the solemn gloom of the wintry woods far off, and that filled him at once with a delighted awe. To their darkness, their mystery, and their shelter, Oth brought him. So softly Oth entered the woods, that the blackbirds that guarded it, sitting watchful on branches, did not flee at his coming, but only uttered slowly their warning notes, and it listened suspiciously till he passed, and were never sure if a man had broken the charm of the wood. Into that charm and the gloom and the deep silence Oth moved gravely, and a solemnness came on his face as he entered the wood. For to go on quiet feet through the wood was the work of his life, and he came to it as men come to their heart's desire. And soon he put the boy down on the brown bracken, and went on for a little while alone. Orion watched him go with his bow in his left hand, till he disappeared in the wood, like a shadow going to a gathering of shadows, and merging amongst his fellows. And although Orion might not go with him now, he had great joy from this, for he knew by the way Oth went, and the air he had, that this was serious hunting, and no mere amusement made to please the child, and it pleased him more than all the toys he had had. And quiet and lonely the great wood loomed round him while he waited for Oth to return, and after a long while he heard a sound, all in the wonder of the wood, that was less loud than the sound that blackbird made scattering dead leaves to find insects, and Oth had come back again. He had not found a deer, and for a while he sat by Orion and shot arrows into a tree, but soon he gathered his arrows and took the boy on his shoulder again and turned homewards, and there were tears in Orion's eyes when they left the great wood, for he loved the mystery of the huge grey oaks, which we may pass by unnoticed, or with but a momentary feeling of something forgotten, some message not quite given, but to him their spirits were playmates. So he came back to Earl as from new companions, with his mind full of hints that he had had from the wise old trunks, for to him each bowl had meaning. And Zerundarel was waiting at the gateway when Oth brought Orion back, and she asked little of his time in the woods, and answered little when he told her of it, for she was jealous of them, whose spell had lured him from hers. And all that night his dreams hunted deer in deeps of the woods. Next day he stole away again to the house of Oth, but Oth was away hunting, for he was in need of meat. So he went to the house of Thel, and there was So he went to the house of Threll, and there was Threll in his dark house amongst the manifold skins. "Take me to the woods," said Orion, and Threll sat down in the wide wooden chair by his fire to think about it, and to talk of the woods. He was not like Oth, speaking of a few simple things which he knew, of the deer, of the ways of the deer, and of the approach of the seasons. But he spoke of the things that he guessed in the deep of the wood, and in the dark of time, the fables of men and of beasts, and especially he cared to tell the fables of foxes and the badgers, which he had come by from watching their ways at the falling of dusk. And as he sat there, gazing into the fire, telling reminiscently of the ancient ways of the dwellers in bracken and bramble, Orion forgot his longing to go to the woods, and sat there on a small chair warm with skins content. And to Threll he told what he had not said to Oth, how he had thought that his mother might come by one day, round the trunk of one tree, the oak trees, for she had gone for a while to the woods, and Threll thought that that might be, for there was nothing wonderful told of the woods that Threll thought unlikely. And then Zerundarel came for Orion and took him back to the castle, and the next day she let him go to Oth again, and this time Oth took him once more to the woods. And a few days later she went up again to Threll's dark house, in whose cobwebs and corners seemed to lurk the mystery of the forest, and heard Threll's curious tales. And the branches of the forest grew black and still against the blaze of fierce sunsets, and winter began to lay its spell on the uplands, and the wiser ones of the village prophesied snow. And one day Orion out in the woods with Oth saw the hunter shoot a stag. He watched him prepare it, and skin it, and cut it into 2 pieces, and tie them up in the skin, with the head and horns hanging down. And then Oth fashioned up the horns to the rest of the bundle, and heaved it onto his shoulder, and with his great strength carried it home. And the boy rejoiced more than the hunter. And that evening Orion went to tell the story to Threll, but Threll had more wonderful stories. And so the days went by, while Orion drew from the forest and from the tales of Threll a love of all things that pertain to a hunter's calling, and a spirit grew in him that was well matched with the name he bore, and nothing showed in him yet of the magical part of his lineage. Interesting. So as he's named after the hunter Orion, he too takes a love of hunting. Where is this going? That we're going to end that here, page 78, chapter 11, The Unenchanted Plain. That's where we'll pick up next time. But I wanted to just speak on the book a little bit. Where I have no idea where this thing is going. I'm fascinated by all the pieces. So, Elfland has ebbed away. It is gone. Alveric has gone after it, and he has not returned. And now Orion is taking to the woods and to the hunt. And did Lyrazel go back? I don't know. I'm if you're watching now, it may not necessarily be obvious. So I'll state it, but I'm reading this blind. I've never read The King of Elfland's Daughter before. I've only heard of it. It's only been recommended to me, but this is a blind read-through. Similar in the way that Frankenstein was a blind read-through. I'm fascinated to see where this thing goes. And the depiction of fairyland and Fey and its version of Feywild is very neat. And I'm curious to know more of what happened. It seems like in the next chapter we're gonna get more of Alveric, so that's cool. But where did they go? And will he find her again, Lyrazel? I do hope so. And I hope that there's reconciliation there. There's a lot. This is really cool. But I gotta go. The day is yet before me, and I have other things to do. This is fun. I hope you'll, if you don't read along with me, that you'll read in your own time and give this book a shot. The language is fun to read, despite what my difficulty is in reading it sometimes. Very fascinating read. Very, very fairy tale in a way. Very fantasy, but old. And oh man, I'm just excited to see where things go, what other parts Zerundarel has to play, the witch, and if Alveric's special sword is going to come into play, what Orion's part in it is. I mean, are we going to pass the ages and have Orion as an adult? Will Alveric be lost forever? I mean, if you've read this, you already know, and so you can maybe take some delight in my interest and curiosity. But yeah, that's where I'll leave it today. And when to aim for Thursday for the next read of this to get to the next 2 chapters, we are doing all right actually in terms of progress. 38 to 78, a good 40 pages, not too bad. Not too bad at a normal pace. We should be able to cook through this without too many parts. But this is where I end things. I'm going to bid you all farewell and enjoy the rest of your day. Enjoy reading. Get to some books, yo. Get to some books, yo. I don't know how to end these silly things, so I'm just going to hit end stream and be done with it.